And on our farm we do, we're not strictly a seed company. We've done a lot of strawberries and garlic and vegetables, and but we've always, seeds has been the longest thing that we've done, and more it's our focus. So more and more, I'm kind of getting sick of picking strawberries, to be honest. So more and more so, and seeds are just fascinating to me because I wouldn't say I mastered strawberries, but there's only so much you can do. But seeds is just like every day I feel like I'm learning something, and it's just such a fascinating area, and more so I think it's just becoming more and more relevant and important. Yeah, and so we're in Black Creek, which is halfway kind of between Courtenay and Kelm River. And we started out, we moved around a lot, but we started saving, we kind of started selling seeds or company, but it was all pretty small. It started in about 2001, but in 2004 we got our own farm. We were lucky to buy land before it got too crazy to buy, and we have about 4.5 acres that we do, and more of it is doing seeds. And then, so we mostly sell now through, we do a lot of these Seedy Saturdays is a big one, and Seedy Saturdays are amazing events. And they really started as a way for people to exchange seeds, and us commercial growers are lucky to be invited and to have be a part of it, but really they started out as a way for people to exchange seeds. That's so important. And then we also sell more and more through stores. We don't do a ton of mail order. Dan actually has a really good mail order system in that. And then we do, we have an amazing farmers market in our area, Comox Valley Farmers Market. Arzina, who was just presenting, does that as well, Mervo Organics. And it's just an amazing market, and we're really lucky to have that as a way to sell seeds. Yeah, so I guess I'll start by saying, like I mentioned, seeds to me is just becoming more and more relevant. And really, like, what's happening is, like we were just talking about in the last presentation, like 2% of food is produced on the island. And it's really crazy, and I don't really know, it freaks me out, to be honest. And I try to relax about it and try to think about it. And there's a lot of really amazing, dynamic people working, but it's a real uphill battle. But seeds really are kind of the foundation of what you start from. There's many aspects to farming and that, but seeds is kind of really the foundational element of what if you don't have seeds, you don't really have much to start from. And like anything, really, there's the range of seeds has become like, it's so vast from us little seed savers. So what we specialize in is like what we call like open pollinated, and we call it public domain seed. So this seed is not really, it's fundamentally different in the idea of, so the Monsantos of the world, or I guess they're Bayer now, what they're trying to do is develop a really cool seed and then own that seed and then sell it to you. What we're trying to do is is take really old seed that has worked for a long time, and we're trying to just keep it going and keep it spread out and keep it in the hands of farmers and gardeners. So it's a fundamentally different, obviously I still have to make money, I still have to pay my bills, but what we're really after is about preserving something that's ancient, right? I mean, seeds, farming started from seeds, from gathering seeds, from selecting seeds. Most of the plants that we grow now are just wild plants that we've saved the seed from. We've altered the characteristics of them, we've fiddled with them, I guess, for lack of a better term. So we specialize in that. So then it's not really that we're opposed to hybrid seed. Hybrid seed can produce amazing results as well. So hybrid seeds, and then there's GMOs, and GMOs I still really have a problem with. I think there is maybe a very small, like, a place for there are some very smart genetic people that could, I come from a very intuitive, hands-on farming, so I don't have a big scientific background, but the big problem with GMO seed is that what they're trying to, like what I just mentioned, is that they're trying to capitalize, they're trying to own something and not let you have it. And they're trying to, not only that, but then they're not necessarily, they would love to tell you that they're trying to feed the world, that their seed is vastly superior and that we're kind of Luddites and our seed is old-fashioned and very nice, but it's never going to feed the world on the scale that we need now. But the problem is what they're also trying to do is control everything. So when they sell you a genetically modified seed, that seed is designed to work with their pesticide products, to work with their fertilizers, and they're trying to market you that as well. So it's a bit of a conflict of interest and a bit of a trying to capitalize and control everything into one very big organization. And so, but what we're really trying to do is empower people to really, I think in gardening in general and in seed saving, if there's one message that I can convey today, it's that you can do it. Like like I say, I come from a very intuitive and hands-on. I learned all this. I didn't go to school. I've taken classes. I've read lots of books. But you really just have to get out there and try it, to be honest. And same with growing food. It can be so daunting, liming, fertilizing, and this and that. But it's really just about getting out and trying it. And maybe you're not going to be hyper efficient to start or whatever, but you just have to try. And it's doable. And there's a wealth of knowledge out there to support you to do it, right? And it is really in this age of climate change, it's you don't want to be totally pessimistic, but the supply of food from California and all these places is just not going to be there. And it's coming up quick. I don't like to scare people or freak people out too much, but it's the amount of change in the climate in terms of droughts, fires, all these things that are happening in these places that are currently supplying 98% of our food, right? And you hate to get to the point, my biggest fear is I don't want to get to the point where it stops all of a sudden, where the tap just turns off. We have to kind of prepare for.
Yeah, that's a great point, because we just had the polar vortex, and I work at the local grocery store, and so everything was stopped outside of the island and nothing was moving. All the produce was cleared out, and people were freaking out. There was no produce. There's no produce. Why do you have it? And I said, none of it is local. You say it's local. It's from North America. It's from sometimes British Columbia if we're lucky. But it's not from here. And so when there's something like a polar vortex or a big fire that affected part of California's crops, we don't get anything. And people look at the empty shelves like, oh my gosh, there's no food. And whatever was there, people bought in panic so they can have some stuff to put away. They don't know how long the weather's lasting. And we're like, oh boy, does anybody out here grow anything? And we're like, no. So people really freaked out, and you could see it. Like, you come to work in the morning, you're like, are we cleaning the shelves, or is there no food? So you really see it there. One thing happens and you got nothing.
And it is an unfortunate part of human nature. I mean, we're awesome at if there's a natural disaster, if there's something really imminent, it's amazing how people can really come together and bond and really create something and really do amazing things. But it's unfortunate. The only unfortunate part about that is it would be nice if we could do that without the disaster. Which is it's tough. I mean, and I was just talking about this yesterday. It's hard to you don't want to freak people out. It's with climate change and with some of these food issues, it can become so depressing. But if you listen to the news and a lot of sources of information, it seems so overwhelming and so grim. But there is so many cool things happening out there, and they're happening in places that you don't hear about them. They're happening in little gardens. They're happening in little groups that come together. Even this weekend, right? It's amazing what a group of volunteers can just throw together, and we're all here because of people had a vision and made this happen, right? So that's my message: is just to empower people. You can do this, right? It's not. There's a lot of rocket science in it, but it's not rocket science too, right? It just really takes people to get out there and grow the seed, right? And it is just vitally important now, more so than ever. And I think too, it's really important when food groups get going and that to also look at seed, because seed can become so even from where we are to here. You guys should really almost have a seed company in this area, right? Or groups that are saving some seed, because what happens a lot with seed is We actually kind of like torture our plant. Like it's hard to do seed production and veg production, because actually what we do a lot is torture our plants, because we want to torture them, and we want to put them out there through stuff that's really grim. We want to put them in floods, in cold weather, in storms, all that stuff. You want the seed to go through that, and then the stuff that survives, you're going to collect that seed, and it's going to have that memory in it, right? So stuff out here, maybe it can deal, maybe after 4 or 5 years, you're going to get a seed that can deal with the fog, or you're going to figure out a variety, what varieties do well here, right? And pass those along. Yeah.
So I've been thinking about that, like in terms of crops like spinach and some cold weather crops, because where I am in Fort Alberni, especially my growing site, it gets way too hot very fast. So I'm probably not the best location to be growing Mizuna seed, kale seed, spinach seed, but I think Tofino maybe could be a really good spot to grow this kind of seed.
Yeah.
So even if the community here concentrated, because I don't know how much seed from vegetables you grow, but a lot of seed growers grow like 50 crops or something. But maybe if they even concentrate on just 10 crops.
To start out.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do about 70 varieties, but yeah, like even just focusing on a few to start, and it just takes, it's a bit of a snowball, right? Once you start, then these things kind of spin off, and more of it spins out. So that's kind of my spiel for that, but I will go into some now. I'm sorry, I don't know kind of how experienced people are here, like what you kind of want to get from this, but if it, like I say, just fire out if there's something you want to know.
I saw a scientific documentary about like different kind of seeds that really got me interested in like the scientific part of it. Is a guy who actually, like through generations of growing tomatoes, he got to a seed that actually can grow in like without water.
Oh,
and
wow.
yeah, that got me really interested in it.
Yeah.
So if you can do that, I mean, I don't know, you know a lot more than me, so
Yeah.
it's
Oh, it's
probably
amazing.
possible to, like,
It's amazing what
change
you
the
can
DNA
do.
of it.
And we're lucky in that, like I say, so the concept is, like I say, it's public domain open pollinated seed. So that what that means is that if you grow it out, you're gonna be able to save the seed from it within some parameters. So squash or brassicas, they'll cross, and if you kind of know some basic rules. But we're lucky in that some really top-notch plant breeders, typically a lot of times they've gone into kind of the bigger money, developing hybrids, developing seed that they can make, that the seed companies can make money for. But there's been a few of them now that have gotten more back interested in these open pollinated seeds, and doing amazing things with them. And it is amazing. Sometimes it's a lot more than 2 generations, but some, last year I went to a presentation from a guy that was just all of a sudden, he wanted to improve Napa cabbage, because most organic growers were going away from it. There was newer hybrids that do well. So he spent 15 years of his life developing this new Napa cabbage, right? It's not everybody's like, I want to go out there and make a Napa cabbage, but that's what he did, right? And super interesting guy. But having that kind of like, having those people that could make a ton more money. He's not getting rich developing that Napa cabbage, right? But could make a ton more money developing hybrids and all kinds of things. But yeah.
So if I understand correctly, what you're saying is that you can invest in growing plant varieties, and like he was saying, like getting to a point where the plant is hardy against weather things, and then you're having a chance to give a seed that's really hardy. And the kind of, I guess, shortcut way is people that try to make a recipe and make a hybrid. Is that basically the 2 ways to do it?
No, hybrid is not necessarily like obviously, like I say, we deal in open pollinated public domain seed. Hybrids are not necessarily a bad thing, but the problem with a hybrid is that you can't then save the seed from it, right? So they've bred it they've taken to put it together, but the offspring of that is not necessarily going to stay true to that. So there's nothing inherently wrong with hybrids. Like it's not saying there's something wrong with it, but and they have done. You can do some pretty amazing things with hybrids. like I said, the problem is that a lot of growers, like say, will get used to growing a certain variety, and then all of a sudden you can't get that variety in the seed catalog because they've stopped producing that hybrid, or the seed company has gone a different direction. They don't want to produce that hybrid. So then you've lost the ability to produce that.
So the
that
difference
crop.
is that the open seed, besides the fact that you like maybe can tailor it through growing conditions or whatever, that is what you talked about before, the fact that food security is shared. Whereas with this, they've kind of monetized, they've kind of turned it into an exclusive business, so then
Yeah, hybrids are a bit more exclusive that way, but like
Yeah.
I say, that I'm not trying to say that there's anything inherently wrong with hybrids. It's just that there's inherent advantages, in my opinion, to open pollinated public domain seed, in that it's in the domain. It's a lot more. It can be a lot more widely available. It's just a much slower. It can be a much slower process like the Napa cabbage as an example, like 15 years to develop this, to improve this. But it was already an amazing cabbage and very old. But he obviously made some, and especially once you're trying to do it on a more commercial scale, it can take a bit more time to develop a good open pollinated seed.
And like hybridization isn't the same as genetically modified.
No, it's different. Yeah, so hybridization is you're taking two of the same. So you take a cabbage and you'd mix them together. You take two parents and you put them together.
Mm-hmm.
The GMO is when you're taking, and the hardest part with a lot of GMO now is they might take a gene from a fish and put it in a tomato, or they're manipulating genes, right? Because to make the tomato more cold hardy, right? So, and like I say, again, like I'm not gonna. The problem I have with GMOs is the way that they're being monopolized, and there's some very much smarter people, geneticists than me, that could make the arguments for what, manipulating genes, and they are getting a lot better at it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's their interest is not to feed the world. Their interest is to make money for their shareholders at the bottom line, right? And it's a bit of a conflict of interest, especially when you want to own the whole system, like I say.
Mm-hmm. That's not food security.
I'm beginning in this in seed saving.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you're going to talk about like the basic rules maybe?
Yeah. So I'll get into that now. So once you start, there's kind of, obviously seed saving is a process, and like I say, it can be a bit hard to do both, to grow vegetables and to save seed, but at the same time, it can be really rewarding, and it can give you a lot of security in that, like I say, if you have a variety you're all of a sudden kind of the guardian of it, and you can always assure you have a quality of it. So starting with the growing, obviously growing for seed, you're starting out by growing vegetable for the most part, and then you really get into, we don't do a lot of kind of plant breeding per se, but what we do is selecting. So I'll walk through and I'll say, we've done this before, and you're walking through and there's just characteristics you like, and I guess you just kind of get an eye for it after a while, but you say it and it's not always bigger is not always better, and like I say, we torture a lot of stuff, we put it through extreme conditions, but you're kind of what you're doing, and so with the growing, you're growing it out, and then you're going to let it go to seed, obviously. And I don't know how many of you have ever seen, sometimes like with lettuce or that, it's if it gets too hot, it wants to grow. Its instinct is to go to seed right away. So you might have seen lettuce that kind of bolts, and that's kind of the beginning of the seed process. But so there's a lot of growing that I won't really go into because it's kind of similar to just general gardening. But for the seed, for starting to save some seeds, what you really want to consider first is you want to kind of lay out in your mind. So like I say, some things, most flowers, most herbs are pretty straightforward in that they won't, I'm trying to think of any that will, but they won't cross. So if you have say broccoli and arugula, what's going to happen is if you have them flowering at the same time, they're going to make a cross. And that cross might be amazing, but it might be something that it's not going to work very well, and you might have this mutant vegetable that doesn't work. So that's what I mean kind of by cross-pollinating. so with lettuce, generally speaking, there's not really, so what we get into is we start planting like what we call isolation distances, or you can get in also to, the one thing that you can do too as well to manipulate the process is you can hand pollinate stuff. So say with squash, you can put a bag around it and then you can pollinate it yourself so that it's not crossing with other things. So lettuce stays pretty, for the most part, stays pretty true. So we can do multiple varieties of lettuce. Greens, so that's where you get into the brassica family. So the brassica family is one that like you cannot really do 2 brassica seeds at the same time. What you can do is in one season you can try to get your one brassica to grow. So in 1 year, so we're a bit unique in that all the 70 varieties we grow them ourselves, but we stagger them. So things like brassicas, we stagger them. We grow 2 brassicas a year. So we have 4 brassicas in total. So every year we're doing 2 brassicas, and then the third year we're back to the other 2. So we're somewhat limited. So certain seed companies like Dan Jason at Salt Spring Seed, what he does is he has other farmers that work cooperatively, and that's a really good model for seed saving as well. There's both work well. We choose not to do that, but that's just us. But so the advantage of that is he can say grow 10. He can have offer 10 brassicas because other farms have grown out those brassicas or those squashes. Yeah.
Maybe, Simon, you can write down like the top 5 easiest crops
Okay.
to grow, like peas and...
Is there I don't have a pen.
There's one down there.
Okay.
Mark it here next to the projector.
Yeah, so like I say, so to start, maybe flowers. For the most part, I'm trying to think. For the most part, flowers are gonna stay true. So if you grow calendula is a super easy seed to start with. And sometimes that's the best way to go, is to start with some things that are easy. So calendula is a great example. So you just grow calendula and then it'll just come up to seed, and then you're just gonna wait until the seed is nice and brown and dry. You're gonna collect it. With flowers, there's not too much going to be cross-pollinating, so you can basically grow a lot of different varieties of flowers and not have to worry about isolating them or pollinating them yourself. And then with herbs, again, that's the general. Herbs gets a bit complicated, but with the basils. So with the basil will cross to some degree, but yeah. So sorry. So lettuce though is one. Lettuce is one that there is not really. You can grow multiple kinds of lettuce and start them, and it's a fairly easy one to start with if you like to grow lettuce. So like I was saying, you're basically going to plant some lettuce, and then you're going to select kind of the nicest ones that you see there, and then you're just going to let them. That's where the patients come in, and that's where it's hard to do the veg production and at the same time, because what you're going to do is you're going to ignore that beautiful. You're going to eat all the bad looking lettuce, and you're going to save the nicest one, and that one's going to go to seed. And so the seed head's going to come out. It's going to go to flower. Hopefully you'll have lots of bees to pollinate it, and then that seed. Basically, you really want with seed. It's a bit of a timing issue, but you really want that seed to be fully. The most important thing is that seed is fully mature. So you don't want to. You can pull it in and dry it, but the problem with that is that you really want all the energy of that plant is going to go up into that seed, and so you really have to be patient and let that seed mature on the plant in the ground, ideally. Now that becomes hard, especially, to be honest, like in a wet climate, that can be challenging, or depending on the fall you have, sometimes that can be challenging. But you really have to be patient in that all that energy that is put in that seed is going to be stored in that seed, and then that is going to give you so much more. When you go to plant that next year, it's going to give you so much more energy to start that whole process. So lettuce is a really good one and fairly straightforward one to save. So with greens, like I say, there's some that are a little more straightforward. Some are a little more complicated. So to go over the major ones, like I say, brassicas. Most people know what brassicas. So brassicas are like your broccolis, arugulas, kale is a brassica. So with most of those, like I say, you want to kind of plan out so that you only have one going at once. So kale, I'll use that as an example. Kale is a biennial, so it's going to produce seed in its second year. So how we do kale is we do it overwintered in the greenhouse. So we plant in late July kale. We let it go over the winter, and we get to harvest kale and have the kale, and then it's going to go to seed in the spring of the following year. And we find it, we used to try to get it to grow right from one spring. We would let it do the season and then overwinter and then harvest the seed. But we find it much easier now to plant it later, so July, August, and it has much more vigor to kind of go over the winter. So then it's going to go to seed. It's going to start to flower very early in the spring, and then have most of you kind of seen the process of going from flower to getting a stalk? And yeah, so then it's again, you just want to be patient and let it dry out. And with seeds like kale, there's always going to be that fine line where you want to let it mature, you want to let it dry out, but at a certain point it's going to get very brittle, and if you kind of brush it or touch it, it's going to pop. So then it becomes a bit harder to harvest. So there's a fine window there where it's kind of ready, but you're still going to be able to harvest it without it exploding and going everywhere. So then the next one I would go over would be, so tomatoes. We grow tomatoes. We're a bit limited because we grow them all in a greenhouse, but tomatoes is one that they don't readily cross-pollinate. So you can do multiple kinds of tomatoes for the most part, and they'll stay true to that variety. So that would be a good one to try as a start. Tomatoes, the issue is that what happens with tomatoes is, from a seed saving perspective, is again what you're trying to do is you're trying to select the best looking fruit, but also the best looking plants. But what goes on with tomatoes is they actually have a very fine. Why it does it is there's a very fine film over them, and it protects them from sprouting. So when you eat a tomato, it's not, if it didn't have this film, it would be full of little tiny sprouts, actually, because the seed would want to sprout, because it's a wet environment. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to break that film, and you actually you rot them down. So we harvest them, we separate out the bulk of the meat for sauce, and then we just put, my wife Heather is kind of a master at it, but she's basically putting it into tubs, and it just turns into a moldy, rotten, disgusting looking mess, which is gross, and it sits on our porch and there's fruit flies everywhere. It's pretty gross in tomato season, but and so what you're doing is you're breaking that film, and then you clean the seed and dry it, and that's how you preserve it. That's the trickiest part about tomatoes, and you can always, if there's information out there, you can always email us to kind of get the process of that. But in terms of tomatoes crossing, though, it's fairly easy to do multiple kinds of tomatoes, and tomatoes would be one too that you really might want to investigate here. There's varieties out there, I'm sure, that would do better here, probably more of the short season varieties and that, but. So squash is one, it gets a bit, squash is one, so basically what there is there's 6 families. So you can grow a cucumber and say a winter squash. You can grow those two and they won't cross-pollinate. But if you try to do 2 winter squash, again, what's going to happen is they're going to crossbreed, and you might have the best squash in the world, or more likely you're going to have a rock. It's just going to taste terrible. So with squash, what you want to do is you either just want to select one that you like and grow it, which is doable on a small scale, or that's where it comes in to having, like, maybe maybe at a friend's place you can plant a different kind of squash, but that's where what we call the isolation distances come in. Yeah.
Like, how far is the isolation?
So it varies, yeah. So squash is, I don't memorize, I don't have it memorized off the top of my head, but that's where kind of the books, and it's readily, like each say for squash, each variety they'll tell you an isolation distance.
Okay.
So corn it's like 2 kilometers or like, but squash, it's probably more like, it can be like a few hundred meters. It just depends a bit on what, and it depends a bit on your situation, the lay of the land. Sometimes if you have a barrier like a row of trees or something, that can act as so it's not the distance isn't set in stone, it can be more to do with your geography too.
And then like the main concern is that seeds cross-pollinating with like a similar breed of seeds or cross-pollinating with anything.
Yeah, so like it's like with squash, like I say, it would be if you had 2 winter squash, like a Hubbard and a butternut.
Mm-hmm.
If you grow them side by side and you save the seed of one, it's not going to necessarily be a butternut or a Hubbard. It's going to be a mix of those two, and it could be good, but it could be weird. Yeah.
It doesn't affect the plant in that first growing season.
It doesn't affect the plant in the first growing season. Where it's gonna affect it is if you save that seed and the seed that when you grow out that seed, that's where you're gonna have the variability. You might not stay true to being a honey nut. So if you had a honey if you had like a butternut and a Hubbard, so that the first year they'll be fine and you get a butternut and a Hubbard. But then if you save the seed from one of those, they're not necessarily going to be, when you plant that out the next season, it's not going to stay true to being a butternut or a Hubbard. Does that make sense?
Even if the fruit it bears still looks like a Hubbard or a butternut, the seed itself might be affected by them living
That's
in
right.
that region.
By cross-pollinating, yeah. And the same with the that's where some of them, so like the brassicas, the squash, those are the main ones really that affects more. Corn, I guess, it would be thrown in that category. And like anything, like everybody, there's a lot of information out there, and a lot of people have their opinions, and some people really panic about corn, but some people have said to me it doesn't matter as much. But like I say, corn, you have to stay true to that variety. It can be really hard to keep a variety of corn going, and that's where where it can be tricky. But there is a lot of information out there. There is kind of references or guidelines to say that you have to kind of keep these apart. So far,
Simon, just a quick question. I'm wondering, can crop rotation or companion planting help with cross-pollination at all, or is that more to do with soil nutrients?
More to do with soil nutrients,
Okay.
yeah. But the planting part is really what I'm talking about now. So is before you implant your garden, you want to be, especially if you want seed from it, that's really where you want to do your proper planning. Consult the proper books or go online and really think about what pollinators or how far apart do I have to keep these. Can I do 2 squash? Like for us, we just try to focus on one variety and leave it at that. But we could maybe do one at one end of our farm and one at the other. Yeah. But I would say too, like the companion planting and the crop rotation, that is a really integral part of of the planning, and it is really important just in a general garden sense, but also for seed saving, obviously too, you want really healthy, good plants, and that's a big part of proper rotation and proper companion planting, and all those things really play into. You are really trying to grow the best vegetable you can, because the best vegetable you can is going to produce the best seed in the long run. So then my favorite thing to grow, to do seed from, and is probably one of the first things I started with, is peas. Peas are generally, again, they generally don't cross-pollinate, so you can do multiple varieties, and they're fairly straightforward. The thing again that you have to do is you have to be patient and not eat the best ones. You have to eat the worst ones, right? And you hopefully don't have any kids run through and say, oh, this is-" So we've actually started to flag the best ones now. Yeah, so they'll stay true. And basically with peas, basically what you're gonna do is you're gonna have a nice pea looking pea, and you're basically just gonna let it complete its process. So it's gonna just dry out. And generally, like I said, as much as we can, we try to drop that drying and maturing process, we try to do that outdoors on the vine. So it's a bit of patience, a bit of planning, a bit of maybe some flagging tape. And so once the seed is dry, then it's really it's taken all the energy it can from the plant, from the ground, from the roots, and then it's going to store it. And what's going to happen is you're going to kind of interrupt the process of the seed by drying it out. You stop the process, and then that's what buys you the winter to store it, to get it, and then in the spring you're planting it and starting the process again by introducing moisture. And the better plant you have, the better you are at creating the better that seed is going to be and the more vigor it's going to have. Yeah.
Is there any tips for storing the seed?
Yeah. So there's some variability in terms of how you want to store seed. The most common principle is that, first of all, the first principle is to be dry. So once you harvest the seed, you bring it in, you clean it, but you also, in that cleaning and harvesting process, you want to dry it out. So as much as I can, you do it on the vine, but then at a certain point too, especially in our climate, you might have to. We've been lucky, we've had some really good falls, so we do a lot of drying outside. I haul the seed out during the day, spread it out in the sun, bring it back inside at night. Or you can get into more like a dehydrator situation where but you want to get it to, you want to make sure that it's dry so it's stable. But then also, and then to do with that, we used to use a lot of plastic and just generally trying to get away from plastic, but also I realized plastic actually to a small degree breathes. So the best storage you can do is actually in glass. So glass jars, we use glass jars extensively. And then there's a temperature component to it, so cool, but in a general sense, I won't get too specific, but you basically want to keep it cool. So luckily we have a basement that's just the ideal temperature, so we store them in glass jars in our basement. Now, I won't go too much into it, but so with herbs, like there's some medicinal herbs, say poppy seed actually likes to be fall planted, because what happens with some seed, and it's super frustrating as a seed saver, because we go through all this, we dry it, we harvest it, we treat them like little babies, we put them on the shelf, and then you go out and you throw some compost out and this volunteer comes up. Or there's something that you were growing last year and then all of a sudden it's just coming up outside, so volunteers. But what's happened with a lot of seed is it wants to go through, some seeds say needs to be frozen before it will activate again. Because it's mimicking what it would be like in nature. So in nature, there is nobody to come and tuck the seed in for the winter. It's sitting out there in the elements. So sometimes with certain, not so much with the common vegetable seeds, but there's some herb seeds, some flower seeds that actually have to go through a process in order for them to, they won't germinate unless they go through a certain process. Yeah. Yeah, and then so with the other seed that we do a lot of is bean, and again, bean will generally, so bush bean will generally, you can grow multiple varieties. Pole bean, they will cross. So again, we only grow one pole bean per year. But scarlet runner is it's a runner. So the runner beans will cross as well. So we just do the one runner bean. But yeah, so it gets into just kind of planning out, like I say, and maybe starting out, so say the easy ones would be the lettuce, peas, tomatoes, bush beans. Those would be examples of stuff that you could grow without having to worry too much about the cross-pollination. Yeah.
With some of the seeds, I've kind of just been playing around with them a lot, but with my scarlet runners in particular,
Sometimes when I harvested them and I broke them open, they were a little bit, like say underdeveloped, just slightly. But and I know with other seeds I've tried, and they still tended to read seed pretty well. But how much of that are you worried about? Because sometimes out here too, with how much humidity we have, you do get a lot of moldy seeds. So sometimes I do pick them before they're totally dry, and because they will just mold. So but do you find that affects it negatively a lot? Because I know I still have had success, but maybe do you just get less success with when you reseed, or?
Yeah, that's where you really get into, like I say, you really kind of get into the finer points of it, and I mean, obviously you want the best results and things you can, but you have to kind of, you're always just navigating this fine line. And sure, if you had let that seed mature on the vine, it might be better, but like you say, it might have just become a moldy mess.
Yeah.
And that, to be honest, it's challenging on the West Coast in general, and for you especially here. Like there is going to be, I'm not going to lie, it's going to be challenging to save seed. So you're just kind of walking that fine line. But I would just say the longer you can leave it on the plant with the roots in, the better. Yeah. And then the other trick too is, like when we harvest a lot of seed, I'll take the whole plant out and leave it on the plant to dry, as opposed to trying to strip it off and let it dry and crack it open and let it dry separately. I'll leave the roots and everything, because then to some degree, as that plant is dying back, it's still going to feed that seed
Yeah, I
a
did
bit.
do that to a bunch of my plants, and I hung them all upside down, but then they all molded really bad too.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering too, like you were saying with the tomatoes, that was really interesting that your wife kind of creates this like moldy little box. Like, so does mold maybe not affect the seeds inside as bad as I'm maybe concerned about? Because I did actually plant out like a bunch of those fell kind of down, and a whole bunch of stuff did come up.
Yeah.
I sort of just threw them all out, but some of them that had like kind of fallen down, they did come up.
Yeah, it can work for sure. Like I say, you're just trying to, with tomato it's a bit different because you're specifically trying to crack that casing that's around it. Yeah, so some seeds that in that case you really want to, that's why you're creating that. Ideally, in an ideal world, you don't want mold, and it only works for certain. Yeah, I see.
I just need a better spot to hang them that's like proper, but it's hard to find out here.
It is, yeah, and like I said, that's why we've been extremely fortunate, because I love when you get those Indian summers where there's lots of sun in the fall.
When you're first getting your initial seed stock, what do you look for from a provider, I guess, to ensure that you're getting quality?
Besides yourself.
Yeah, that's how you catch it. Well, it does really become like any part of this process. It really just becomes a relationship thing, and trusting that person and experimenting with that seed. I mean, not every, to be perfectly frank, not every small seed producer, some are, it's like anything, right? Some are better, some are worse. Not worse. That's not the kind word to say, but there's better, there's worse. And also, like I say, it's a lot to do with varieties in your area, so finding people that carry varieties. A lot of it too, like obviously for us, like I say, I mean, we're island growing, so that it's kind of roughly the same. So like, I don't like to speak badly about other companies, or like, I'm not in any way trying to put down West Coast Seed, but West Coast Seed, because of the volume of seed and because of the vast variety, number of varieties that they can provide, that seed is coming from all over Canada and all over the States, basically. Because us small producers, we just can't produce enough. They do try to deal with people like us, but it's like any business, it's hard to deal with. It's easier to deal with one producer than 100, right? And it is like, I just can't provide enough seed on my 4.5 acres to provide for West Coast Seed, right? So, as for smaller producers like gardeners or market gardeners, like finding those companies that are local, that seed has been on the coast and has experienced the coast. So it really just becomes a matter of, just like I say, just trying it and seeing what you like, and dealing with trying different companies and seeing what works for you. And eventually you'll just click, someone will click, and yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's really.
I have a few questions, but I'll start with, like, how do you mitigate like predator pressure? like especially when you're letting some seeds go and kind of become sweeter or ferment or whatever, like it often attracts predators, especially like your sweet peas that are hanging there, right? The birds are just like, oh, this is a smorgasbord.
Yeah.
And I use peas as an example because I tried this last summer and all of them were attacked by birds.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
how do you work with that?
Do you need cages?
Non-invasive.
Yeah, to be honest, like to give you an example, the past 2 years, every single bean plant that I've grown has been eaten by rabbits. So literally this year I'm making Fort Knox, like and I'm not a mean person, but like you try to trap them and it's just, it's not fun.
No.
But yeah, to some degree, in a small garden it can be challenging with birds, but it just really depends a bit where you are and just experimenting. There's, you can try some remay is a way, cages, fences, all that stuff. You just kind of really, it's kind of just, you have to kind of wing it. And we're deer fenced, but I mean, we're only 6 feet, so they can jump in. They jump in there occasionally and do some damage, and it's just trial and error. And just the one rule that we live by is just try and try again, And it can be really frustrating, but that's the nature of this business, right? You win some and you lose some, and you have to celebrate the successes and move on from the losses. Because if you don't deal well with the losses, you're not going to do well. So, yeah. Did you have anything other?
Well, and then I'm curious, like especially with your tomatoes, have you ever had a problem with blight? And has that affected a large amount of your
So that's why we really do them in greenhouses.
Okay.
And the way to avoid blight, although I was talking to someone here, I'm not sure have any of you had blight in this? Oh, okay, so it is, if you isolate it, sometimes it doesn't, you're not going to get it because it's the spores that are around. So if it's around, basically what you're trying to do is just even from a very small plant, you're just trying to not get the leaves wet. It's a tough here, right? It's an uphill battle, but so greenhouse, or even if you can provide a roof, because that's the other thing too, is like sometimes by just doing a roof you're getting more ventilation too. But then using like just watering can or some kind of drip, just never overhead water them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even in a greenhouse, I found I had something that looked a little bit blightish.
Yeah.
I didn't want to call it that in my greenhouse, but I found I've just started always choosing varieties that mature earlier in the year.
Right, yeah.
If you're heading into August, we're from Port Alberni.
Yeah.
We have a lovely cooking hot summer often, but as you head into August, it starts getting a little chillier, and then it seems to encourage, maybe it's the dew.
Yeah.
But I just have
Yeah,
found the smaller or medium-sized tomatoes I love a big beefsteak, but it's
Yeah.
not gonna happen
Yeah.
without blight.
Yeah, and that really gets back to our point about varieties and finding those early. One of our favorites is a Mervo rocket, we call it, and but like greenhouses can be very moist environments too, right? So it is challenging. So you want a lot of ventilation in your greenhouse, but like you say, early varieties too really help with blight for sure.
Right
And
here, with the early varieties that come up.
Yeah.
I hate to have to do it, but I don't plant things as close together as I can.
Right,
I want to
that's
get
part of it,
a
yeah.
little space, but it just creates so many problems with the moisture. And
Yeah.
The breeze will dry it out if you just leave some space.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point.
I don't want to throw too much of a beginner question after all these
No, it's
comments,
fine.
but one of the things that I was seeing a lot through comments on like farming magazines and things like that is people were saying saving seeds is something that, unlike plants, you can like build up, so to speak, and they were saying like you after a certain amount of time you have to do less work. And I'm not really understanding what that means, because essentially it seems just like the same work as growing a plant to eat, only you have to be more patient. So like, do they mean that, let's say if you plant like, I don't know, a giant patch full of lettuce, like, there's no way all that seed is going to turn out exactly the same.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know if maybe I misunderstood that, but like basically with seeds, you're growing the plant the same way you're growing it to eat it, only you just have to be more patient.
That's right, yeah.
So you're
and
not-
it's just a longer process, more patience.
Yeah, so
And like
yeah,
I say,
so-
getting used to not eating the best to eating the worst.
Okay.
It's yeah.
So
But-
have two gardens, have a
Yeah,
fruit garden and a
but
seed
maybe
garden.
also what you mean too is like I always like so tomatoes is a good example. Like you can just get way more varieties from a seed than you can by going to a store and buying a plant, like to start out the process. But yeah, for seed production there is really, I mean it gets really into like, I mean we do a lot of selecting, but I'm by no means a plant breeder. So I'm not really breeding, a plant breeder would more focus, like I say, on a cabbage and just really improving that one variety and like doing trials and selections and growing like big field of them and maybe selecting 200 out of that big field. You know, it's a whole process, but you can really get to a point where you're selecting and you can, even in 2 or 3 generations, you can all of a sudden, your results are gonna improve by selecting the best. And then the one thing that I have to mention too is just, I don't want to make it get too complicated, but there is, so we were talking about isolation distances, and there is, it can be challenging for a small gardener, and I wouldn't dissuade you from trying, but there is somewhat of a minimum population. So obviously you want to be selective, but at the same time, to keep the genetic diversity, there is kind of a minimum number of plants that you want to harvest the seed from. You know, so some of them are like 25, some of them are a bit higher, but it can be easy, like in the case of lettuce, it can be easy to do 28 plants, but it can be harder with you know, tomatoes, or
So
we
basically you're saying
have that
don't
challenge.
take them all? Is that what you're saying? If let's say
Well-
they all look good?
Yeah, so basically what I'm saying is like, in order to make the diversity, like you might grow, you know, 100 tomato plants, and you might, instead of just picking the one best tomato plant, you might want to pick 25 of the plants,
okay.
right? There is
I
a
understand.
minimum, there is kind of a minimum number you need to maintain that. And again, like it's a lot more in depth than I can go into, but there is great books and resources out there that will give you that kind of information if you. But again, like don't get daunted by all that information. Like you can still grow. If you can only fit 5 tomato plants, then it's still going to be even if you took from those 5, even if one of them wasn't that great, like. It's still, the process is still, you're still going to get a better result over time from keeping your own seed.
So when
Yeah.
people say they've kept heirloom seed, does that mean they've dedicated an area of their growing space to keep redoing the same thing essentially, to try to preserve a species from like 200 years ago? Is that what they're talking about?
So heirloom seed, yeah, is roughly speaking like an older seed, and you're just keeping that. It's something that you've acquired probably from someone else, and then you've kept that variety
It's a
going.
dedication to keep that.
But like I say, like so you might get one of my seeds, and if you start growing it here and start saving the seed from it, it's gonna adapt somewhat to this area, is what I'm saying, and give you better over time. Is going to give you better results gradually
For this area,
For this
right.
area, even from Black Creek to here, it's going to be different. Yeah. So I think I've gone a bit over time, but I just wanted to mention, like we've been talking about certain things. So this is my favorite book and kind of my go-to. It's called Seed to Seed by Suzanne Ashworth. There's a ton of good books out there. Dan Jason is also another, he's put out a lot of really good books for beginners. I think they're set up today. Seeds of Diversity, I noticed, has a really good kind of a smaller scale book if you just want to start dabbling in a few seeds.
What was
They
it called?
have
Seed diversity?
Seeds of Diversity.
Seed diversity.
They have a really good guide to kind of get you started on some basic seed stuff. And I'm sorry, I forgot my card, but if you ever, it's goodearthfarms.ca. Always feel free to email me if you have questions about seed stuff, or like if you want some information about how to save tomato seed, or if you have questions, always feel free to email me if there.
That's awesome.
Does anybody else have anything else quick? Well,
I just wanted to ask about drying seed. If I can do it also indoor in case it's like constant wetness.
yeah. So like I say, you're trying to obviously get it as mature as you can, but
Right.
eventually you might have to do it inside.
Okay.
And ideally, the more you can keep it on the plant, the better. Obviously, sometimes that isn't
Right.
is easy. But those are kind of general guidelines, but like everything, you kind of have to take those and adapt them.
Alrighty.
So obviously here, yeah, with so much rain, at some point you're gonna have to pull it inside and dry it.
Yeah.
Because you do really want to make sure that it is dry, and like we were mentioning, you don't want to, you kind of want to avoid the mold as much as you can, so. Yeah.
And when you say, sorry. When you say you want to keep it on the plant, this means for the drying process, right?
Yes.
After you can split it up?
And then, yeah, I didn't get into that, but again, there's a lot of good resources out there. But generally speaking, so once you get it dry, then you're gonna have to clean it.
Yeah.
And that's a whole another process. And like, from beans, so beans we have like, it's really actually fun. We have a stomp box, and because they're dry, they're gonna be hard, so we just stomp.
Oh.
Yeah, and then, but there's, on a more bigger scale, there's threshers and that to kind of separate the chaff and the seed.
Okay.
For the first process, you kind of want to kind of crush it. Some things like brassicas, it's pretty easy to crush. Beans, we crush it, and then I just use an air compressor a lot, but I'm just building what we call an air separator. So it basically vibrates the seed into these tubes.
Okay.
And the tube is, the one end of the tube has a vacuum.
Yeah.
And so you can control the vibrator and you can control the vacuum.
That's for the cleaning.
And so the seeds fall and the chaff goes into a tub, and then you can look at the chaff to make sure you're not getting good seed in there.
Okay.
But basically for home gardeners, you can use a lot of stomping, little stomp boxes. You're going to want to kind of crush it all up, and then you're going to want to separate the seed from the chaff. And that process, you can use air compressors are handy, screens are handy, so even just like little sieves that you get at the kitchen store, having a bunch of different sizes of screens is kind of the basic starting points. And again, there's machines, there's big commercial, but on a home scale, it's doable, and you just kind of have to experiment, and there's really good information out there as well.
Okay, thank you.
One of the best things I learned from Salt Spring guys for this West Coast collecting seeds is I was waiting for like my leeks, umbels, the great big umbels, to get, ripe enough, and it would start raining every year. And he said, "What are you waiting for the whole umbel to get mature? Just even if you can get a dime size of the seed, take that." And I'm like, oh. Like that's what I was doing, waiting for the whole umbel to do at once. So just look for whatever is ripe and harvest that before it gets soaking wet.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I hope it's been helpful.
Thank you.